Why women are attracted to silence and disdain. Have you ever noticed that the more a man pulls away, the more some women chase after him? The colder he gets, the warmer she becomes. The less he texts back, the more she thinks about him. You might think this is just modern dating madness, but Freud not only noticed this pattern over a century ago, he explained it in detail. Today, we're diving deep into one of psychology's most uncomfortable truths: why silence and even disdain can become magnets for desire. Before we start, subscribe if you want to understand your mind and explore what Freud uncovered about human behavior. Hit the bell, because this might change how you see your own relationships forever. The provocative question. So let's get straight to the point. Why do some women find themselves drawn to men who show little to no interest? Why does emotional unavailability sometimes feel more exciting than genuine affection? This isn't about victim blaming or gender stereotypes. This is about understanding the unconscious patterns that drive human behavior, patterns that affect people of all genders, but that Freud specifically explored in the context of what he called feminine psychology. You know that friend who always ends up with guys who treat her poorly, or maybe you've been there yourself, finding yourself more interested in someone who barely texts back than in someone who's clearly interested in you. Freud would say, of course this happens. Your unconscious mind is running a program from childhood, and it's stronger than your rational thoughts. Let's break this down, the unconscious machinery. First, we need to understand how Freud saw the human psyche. Imagine your mind like an iceberg. What you see above water, your conscious thoughts, your rational decisions, that's maybe 10% of what's really going on. The other 90%, that's your unconscious. And down there, Freud discovered, are all your earliest experiences, your deepest fears, and your most primitive desires. This underwater world doesn't care about logic. It operates on emotional patterns established in your first years of life. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Freud identified something he called the repetition compulsion. Your unconscious mind doesn't try to avoid pain. It tries to recreate familiar situations, even painful ones, because familiarity feels like safety. Think about it like this. If your unconscious mind is a computer, it's running on very old software written when you were a child, trying to make sense of love, attention, and safety. So when a woman finds herself attracted to emotional unavailability, Freud would ask, what was her first experience of love? What did she learn about how to get attention and validation? And here comes the crucial part, the paternal complex, the father figure, the first blueprint. Freud believed that our first romantic template comes from our relationship with our opposite sex parent. For many women, this means the father figure becomes the unconscious blueprint for what love feels like. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. If that father figure was emotionally distant, critical, or inconsistent with affection, the child's brain makes a devastating connection. Love equals having to work for attention. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine a little girl whose father is always busy, always on his phone, rarely gives her attention unless she does something exceptional. What does her unconscious mind learn? Love is scarce. Love must be earned. When someone ignores me, it means I need to try harder. Fast forward 20 years, she meets a guy who's genuinely interested, who texts back quickly, who wants to spend time with her. But her unconscious mind whispers, this doesn't feel like love. Love is supposed to be difficult. Love is supposed to make you chase. So she becomes bored. She finds excuses. She pulls away. But then she meets someone who's cold, distant, barely responds to her messages. And suddenly, her unconscious mind lights up. Now this feels like love. This feels familiar. It's not that she consciously enjoys being treated poorly. It's that her unconscious mind recognizes the pattern and mistakes familiarity for rightness. The psychology of silence. Now let's talk about silence specifically. Why is silence so powerful as an attraction mechanism? Freud understood that the human mind hates uncertainty. We're constantly trying to fill in gaps, to understand, to make meaning. When someone is silent, your brain goes into overdrive trying to figure out what they're thinking. But here's the twist. Silence also creates what Freud called projection. When someone doesn't give you information about themselves, your mind fills in the blanks, usually with whatever you most want to see. Think about it like a blank screen. A talkative person is like watching a movie. You see exactly what's there. But a silent person, that's like staring at a blank screen where you project your own movie. You start imagining. He must be thinking deep thoughts. He must be mysterious. He must be so interesting that he doesn't need to prove himself with words. The silence becomes a canvas for your fantasies. But there's something even deeper happening. Freud noticed that for some people, especially those with complex relationships to authority figures, silence triggers what he called masochistic tendencies, not in a sexual sense, but in terms of finding challenge and difficulty emotionally. Stimulating when someone is easy to read, easy to please, easy to be with. It doesn't activate the same psychological systems that were trained in childhood to work hard for love and attention, disdain and psychological reinforcement. Now we get to the really uncomfortable part. Why actual disdain can become attractive. Freud observed that some people develop what he called a moral masochism. They unconsciously seek out situations where they feel inferior or rejected because it confirms their deepest beliefs about themselves. If a woman grew up feeling like she had to earn love, that she wasn't inherently worthy of affection, then being treated with disdain doesn't feel wrong. It feels accurate. It's like her unconscious mind saying, finally, someone who sees me the way I see myself. And here's the psychological trap. When someone treats you poorly and you stay, and then occasionally they give you a tiny bit of positive attention, your brain releases a massive hit of dopamine. It's called intermittent reinforcement, and it's the same mechanism that makes gambling so addictive. One cold text, one dismissive comment, one eye roll, and then suddenly a smile. That smile feels like winning the lottery because your brain has been starved of positive reinforcement. Regular kindness from a consistently loving person doesn't create the same neurochemical high because there's no scarcity, no unpredictability, no challenge to overcome. Your unconscious mind thinks, if it's easy to get, it must not be valuable. How this plays out today. So how does this show up in today's world? Social media has turned this psychological pattern into an art form. The guy who takes hours to respond to texts, who views your Instagram stories but doesn't reply to your messages, who's always busy but somehow finds time to post about his weekend plans that don't include you. Your rational mind knows this behavior is rude, but your unconscious mind might be interpreting it as, he's so important, so in demand, so valuable that his attention is precious. If I could just get more of it, I would feel special. Or think about the workplace dynamic. The boss who rarely gives praise, who's always critical, who makes you feel like you're never quite good enough. Some people find themselves working overtime, not just for the paycheck, but for that rare moment of approval that feels like gold because it's so scarce. Even in friendships, you might notice you think more about the friend who's always a little distant, a little unpredictable, than about the friend who's consistently warm and available. It's not that you don't appreciate kindness. It's that your unconscious mind has been programmed to interpret challenge as value and ease as boredom, the transference trap. Freud had a term for this, transference. It's when you unconsciously transfer feelings and patterns from past relationships onto current ones. So when a woman finds herself attracted to emotional unavailability, she might actually be trying to resolve an old childhood wound. Her unconscious mind thinks, if I can just make this distant person love me, it will prove that I'm worthy. It will heal that old hurt. But here's the cruel irony. You can't heal a childhood wound by recreating the childhood situation. You can't prove you're lovable by convincing someone who doesn't want to love you. It's like trying to prove you're a good driver by only driving on icy roads. The challenge doesn't make you better, it just makes everything harder. And yet, the unconscious mind keeps trying, keeps hoping that this time will be different. that this distant person will be the one who finally sees your worth and gives you the validation you've been seeking since childhood. The Freudian solution. So what? What Freud suggests for breaking this pattern? First, awareness. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. If you recognize yourself in these patterns, the first step is simply noticing them without judgment. Oh, there I go again. Being more interested in someone who's hard to reach. I notice I'm working extra hard to get attention from someone who seems unimpressed with me. Second, analysis of the origin. Freud believed in going back to the source. What were your earliest experiences of love and attention? What did you learn about your own worth? What patterns were established in your family? This isn't about blaming your parents or dwelling on the past. It's about understanding the programming so you can choose whether to keep running it. Third, conscious choice. Once you understand the pattern, you can start making different choices. When you feel that familiar pull toward someone who's emotionally unavailable, you can pause and ask, is this attraction based on their actual qualities? Or is this my unconscious mind trying to recreate a familiar dynamic? Fourth, what Freud called sublimation, channeling that energy into something constructive. If you have a deep need to work for validation, channel it into your career, your art, your personal growth, not into trying to win over people who aren't interested. The uncomfortable truth. Here's what Freud understood that many people don't want to hear. Sometimes what we call love is actually just familiar dysfunction. Sometimes the person who makes your heart race isn't the person who's good for you. They're just the person who reminds your unconscious mind of home. Real love, mature love, might actually feel a little boring at first if you're used to the drama of chasing unavailable people. It might feel too easy, too simple, too predictable. But that's because real love isn't about proving your worth. It's about being valued for who you already are, the person who responds to your texts, who makes time for you, who shows consistent interest. That might not trigger the same unconscious patterns, but it's probably a much healthier foundation for an actual relationship. So here's my final question for you. What if everything you think is chemistry or passion is actually just your childhood, trying to get the attention it never received? What if the people you find boring are actually just healthy? And what if learning to appreciate consistent kindness over intermittent excitement is one of the most important psychological skills you could develop? Freud believed that understanding our unconscious patterns is the first step toward freedom. From them, you don't have to keep repeating the same relationship dynamics over and over. You can choose differently, but first, you have to see the pattern. So what do you think? Do you recognize any of these patterns in yourself or people you know? Have you ever found yourself more attracted to someone who was hard to reach than someone who was genuinely interested? Comment below and let me know. I read every single comment. And if this helped you understand something about yourself, share it with someone who might need to hear it. What Freudian topic should I explore next? The psychology of jealousy. Why we sabotage good relationships. Let me know what you want to understand about your own mind. Subscribe for more insights into what Freud discovered about human behavior. And remember, understanding yourself is the first step toward choosing better.